to him about tariffs. Canada has been discussing this quite actively overnight with the president's proposed 25% tariffs.
Apparent that the Trump administration, genuinely, the incoming Trump administration, genuinely believes that tariffs are going to be a source of revenue.
Did you know that Ontario supplies half of Michigan's power? Doug Ford just threatened to pull the plug on America's energy supply. Trump's tariffs could backfire spectacularly, leaving millions of Americans in the dark. In a shocking turn of events, Premier Ford is ready to wage war on Trump's trade policies. This isn't just about steel or cars anymore. It's about keeping the lights on in the USA. Stay tuned to see how this power play unfolds. Doug Ford just dropped a bombshell that's shaking the foundations of US-Canada relations. The Premier of Ontario threatened to cut off Michigan's power supply, a move that could plunge millions of Americans into darkness. It's a bold strategy that's left many wondering, just how much power does Canada hold over its southern neighbor? Let's break it down. Ontario isn't just supplying a few light bulbs to Michigan. We're talking about half of the state's entire power needs. That's right, millions of Americans rely on Canadian energy to keep their homes warm, their businesses running, and their hospitals operating. Ford's threat isn't just empty words. It's a stark reminder of the deep connections between our two nations. But Ford didn't stop there. He took his message straight to American airwaves, appearing on major news networks to deliver a fiery warning. If Trump wants to play hardball, we're ready to shut it all down, Ford declared, his voice dripping with determination.
Message to the U.S. You come and attack Ontario, you attack livelihoods of people of Ontario and Canadians. We're going to use every tool in our toolbox.
It was a moment that left American viewers stunned, suddenly realizing just how vulnerable they might be. The numbers behind this power play are truly eye-opening. Did you know that Canada supplies 14% of the electricity consumed in the entire United States? Or that some states, like Vermont, get a whopping 60% of their power from north of the border? These aren't just statistics, they represent real leverage that Ford is now wielding like a weapon. So what pushed Ford to make such a drastic threat? It all comes down to protecting Canadian interests. With Trump's tariffs looming, Ford saw an opportunity to fight fire with fire.
Premier Doug Ford is threatening to cut off energy supply to the U.S. in response to the tariffs threatened by U.S. President-elect Donald Trump.
By threatening America's power supply, he's forcing U.S. leaders to reconsider the true cost of their trade policies. It's a high-stakes game of chicken, with millions of American homes and businesses caught in the middle.
And Canadians across the border. And let's hope that never comes to that point. Let's hope we can get through this trade deal.
Ford's strategy is clear. Use Ontario's energy dominance to force Trump back to the negotiating table. It's a bold move that's united many Canadians behind him, even as it sends shockwaves through Washington. But this is just the opening salvo in what could become a much larger conflict. How did we reach this point of no return? To understand that, we need to look at the events that set this powder keg ablaze. It all started with an unexpected announcement from the White House that caught even America's closest allies off guard. 1.3 trillion. That's the staggering amount of trade between the US and Canada now hanging in the balance. As Trump's tariffs threaten to upend decades of economic cooperation, we're left wondering, is America really prepared for the consequences of this high-stakes gamble?
Is not with Canada. The problem is with China. And China shipping in parts to Mexico, Mexico slapping on made in Mexico.
The White House's sudden tariff announcement sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles, catching even America's closest allies off guard. Trump claimed these measures were necessary to protect American interests, but many are questioning the logic of targeting your biggest trading partner and closest ally.
Spoke out strongly in favor of a robust Canadian response to unjustified tariffs.
The scale of this economic showdown is truly mind-boggling. Canada isn't just another trade partner, it's the #1 trading buddy for 17 US states and runner-up for 11 more. We're talking about millions of American jobs and billions in economic activity that could be disrupted overnight. Doug Ford, never one to mince words, laid it out plain and simple. China is the problem, Mexico is the problem. He's got a point. Why is Trump picking a fight with Canada when there are bigger fish to fry?
Talk to him about tariffs. Canada has been discussing this quite actively overnight with the president's proposed 25% tariffs.
The premier didn't stop there, warning that these tariffs could send prices skyrocketing for everyday Americans. If someone in Texas is buying a pickup truck, you put tariffs on that, that's going to be $75,000. Ouch. It's not just Canadian politicians sounding the alarm. US governors are pushing back hard, realizing that 9 million American jobs depend on trade with Ontario alone. Business leaders are in a panic, seeing their carefully crafted supply chains about to be shattered. But here's where things get really interesting. What if this trade war isn't just about economics? John Bolton, former US ambassador to the UN, dropped a bombshell that's got everyone talking. He described Trump's relationship with Trudeau as deeply troubled, hinting at a personal vendetta driving these decisions. Bolton spilled the tea on a G7 meeting where Trump flew into a rage over Trudeau's comments, dramatically withdrawing from the outcome document. It's starting to look like wounded pride, not economic strategy, might be the real force behind these tariffs. As the deadline looms and tensions reach a boiling point, one question remains. How will Canada respond to this economic assault? With Doug Ford ready to hit the kill switch on Michigan's power supply, we might be on the brink of an all-out trade war that could reshape North America's economic landscape for generations to come.
Apparent that the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, genuinely believes that tariffs are going to be a source of revenue.
Doug Ford just threatened to plunge Michigan into darkness, but not everyone in Canada is ready to flip that switch. As Canadian leaders gathered for an emergency meeting, a shocking divide emerged that could unravel their entire strategy against Trump's tariffs. Will internal strife hand the US an unexpected advantage? The tension was palpable as premiers from across Canada convened to address the looming trade war. Doug Ford, Ontario's firebrand leader, came out swinging. "We need to be ready to fight," he declared, his voice filled with determination.
The number one focus now is to protecting jobs against the attack coming from the tariffs from President-elect Trump. That's what we're focused on.
This fight is coming 100% on January the 20th or January 21st. But as Ford rallied the troops for battle, a surprising rift began to form. On one side stood Ford and his allies, pushing for an aggressive response to Trump's threats. They argued that only a show of strength would force the US back to the negotiating table. But across the room, Prime Minister Trudeau urged caution, warning against escalating the conflict. The clash between these two approaches was explosive, with Ford openly criticizing Trudeau's comments about US politics as not helpful at all. As the debate raged on, it became clear that Canada's united front was cracking under pressure. Some premiers backed Ford's tough talk, while others sided with Trudeau's diplomatic approach. The disagreement threatened to weaken Canada's position just when they needed to stand strong against American aggression. Experts watching the situation unfold warned that this internal divide could be disastrous. A fragmented response would play right into Trump's hands, giving him the opportunity to exploit Canada's weaknesses. The stakes couldn't be higher. Millions of jobs and billions in trade hang in the balance. As the meeting stretched on, the urgency of finding common ground became painfully clear. Ford and his supporters pushed for a comprehensive list of retaliatory measures, with Ontario's energy supply to Michigan at the top of the list. "We will go to the full extent depending on how far this goes."
And he told me very clearly that we can avoid those tariffs if we do what needs to be done with the border.
Ford promised, his words sending shivers through the room. In the end, a fragile compromise began to take shape. The leaders agreed to present a united public front while preparing for various scenarios behind the scenes. They would attempt one last round of negotiations with the US while quietly readying their economic weapons, just in case. But as the Canadian leaders left the meeting, one question lingered in the air. Would this shaky alliance be enough to stand up to Trump's trade assault, or had the cracks in Canada's armor already given America the upper hand? The clock is ticking, and the US-Canada trade dispute has reached a boiling point. As January 20th looms large, both nations are bracing for an economic showdown that could reshape North America's future. The stakes couldn't be higher, with billions of dollars and millions of jobs hanging in the balance. Behind closed doors, negotiators from both sides are locked in frantic last-minute talks, but progress seems elusive.
Between the feds and Canadian premiers as they wrestle with a threat of 25% tariffs on goods going to the U.S. unless they shore up our borders.
The U.S. remains firm on its tariff threats, while Canada stands ready to unleash its own economic weapons. As the hours slip away, the possibility of a compromise grows dimmer by the minute. Experts are painting a grim picture of what could happen if these powerhouse neighbors can't find common ground. A full-scale trade war could send shockwaves through both economies, disrupting vital supply chains and driving up prices for everyday consumers. The automotive sector, where parts often cross the border multiple times before assembly, stands to be hit particularly hard. But the wild card in this high-stakes game is Doug Ford. The Ontario Premier's threat to cut off Michigan's power supply has everyone on edge. "My #1 job is to protect Ontario and Canadians as a whole," Ford declared recently. "We will go to the full extent depending on how far this goes." The question on everyone's mind, will he actually follow through and plunge millions of Americans into darkness? As tension mounts, an unexpected player has entered the fray. Reports are emerging that some US governors, acutely aware of the potential impact on energy prices in their states, are now advocating against Trump's tariffs.
Has suggested that Canada might halt energy imports into the United States if the president goes ahead with his proposed tariffs.
This last-minute intervention could shift the dynamics of the negotiations, potentially offering a glimmer of hope for a peaceful resolution. Yet with mere hours left until the deadline, uncertainty reigns supreme. Will cooler heads prevail, or are we about to witness an economic battle that could redefine the US-Canada relationship for generations? As the world watches and waits, one thing is clear: after January 21st, nothing will be the same.